Mom, what are you doing?
What? What do you mean?
Well, don't you remember the 8th Commandment?
Oh, of course. It's thou shalt not covet graven images. Something about covet.
Thou shalt not steal!
Oh.
Hello, and welcome to The Simpsons Countdown, the podcast where we go back to the beginning and watch all of The Simpsons, to trace the creative evolution of the series and count down, finding the exact moment in which it began its inevitable decline. I'm your host, Erix Antoine, and this week sees the return of the delightful Chris Prentice. We'll be discussing Homer versus Lisa and the 8th Commandment, a very funny episode which originally aired in the US on February 7th, 1991. In this episode, Homer gets an illegal cable hookup. This coincides with Lisa learning about the 8th Commandment in Sunday school, where she is assured that stealing is a deadly sin that will grant her a place in hell. She protests by refusing to watch television. Meanwhile, Homer has organized a huge get-together so that apparently the entire town of Springfield can come watch a big boxing match at the house. Racked with guilt over his crime, he's unable to enjoy that fight and decides to ultimately cut the cable and ensure a place in heaven, I guess. Despite the moralizing, it's actually a very funny episode with lots of great gags and set pieces, as well as pretty authentic jabs at cable TV of the early 90s. Chris Prentice and I are about to break it all down for you. So without further ado, here we go. Hey, welcome back, Chris. What's going on?
Oh, not too much. Just kind of surviving day by day, just like everybody else, and trying to get through the old pandemic as best I can.
As are we all. But it's all good. We really do have it good in comparison to other pandemics in history. It's like I get complaining about it and everything. I get it. I mean, it's annoying, it's boring, but it's like, hey, we've got internet, we've got streaming services, we're fine.
Oh yeah,
so
no, could be a lot worse.
a hell of a lot worse.
I don't know, how they dealt with it back when the different gigantic flu outbreaks kind of took over in the earlier times in our history. But yeah, we got a lot more easily accessible entertainment at our fingertips than those people did.
Helps pass the time, as they say.
Oh yeah.
And so here, yeah. So Simpsons is a good one. Is as good a time waster as anything. And
of course.
We are here to talk about Homer versus Lisa and the 8th Commandment, a classic season 2 episode.
Oh yeah. This is definitely, so far of the ones that I've been able to discuss with you, they've all been winners, and this is probably my favorite out of all of them so far. This one is fantastic.
Yes, well, it was definitely a favorite at the time. It's one of those that has stuck with me throughout the years because when I first saw it, I saw it when it first came out, and I remember it making an impression on me and me thinking it was just really funny and a very good episode. Back then, I used to tape the Simpsons episodes. That's what I used to do. Back.
I was the same way.
Yeah, so I would tape them so that I could revisit them, and this was one that I revisited many, many times. It was definitely a favorite of mine, and watching it again years later, it's really funny. I mean, it still holds up. It's just a nice little story. It has a lot of funny gags. Here's the thing. So here we are. This is whatever. It's episode 12 or something of the second season. So we're about halfway through the second season. All right. And a couple of weeks ago, talking with someone else right here on this podcast, we placed forward a kind of theory, we didn't go deep into it, but I wanted to sort of put it out there again to sort of see what you thought about it. So, a few episodes before this, we have the classic episode Bart the Daredevil, which, as you'll recall, is about, Bart wanting to become a, Daredevil. and he's using his skateboard to jump over several different things, and his big ambition is to jump over Springfield Gorge, correct?
Right.
So you remember that episode, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Now, you know that there's the long-held theory about a television show jumping the shark, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
This is a reference to Happy Days, of course, and that once when it became really focused on Fonzie and all his antics, and it really became about him. And then there's this one big episode where he's got his motorcycle, he's pulling stunts, and the whole thing about how that was basically when Happy Days began to kind of go down the tubes, right?
Yes, that's right.
So it's become a sort of terminology to refer to a series jumping the shark. There comes this moment where the show jumps the shark. Okay. And the purpose of this podcast is, of course, to find the jump the shark moment for The Simpsons. But what we saw that day was, how about making up a new term, and instead of saying jumping the shark, for the opposite, we say jumping the gorge, because it seems almost like that episode, like the Bart the Daredevil episode, is almost a dividing line, not of the season, but of the series. It's almost like this moment. It marks this moment where they sort of cross this line. And from that point on, it's like this uptick in quality where we really start barreling towards the Simpsons, the classic Simpsons that we all know and love. And this is one of those episodes.
Oh yeah, no, I like that. That's a great way of putting it. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think as good as the show was in the first season, I mean, it certainly takes bigger strides in season 2, and the moment that you mentioned is certainly one of the high points of that second season. And yeah, I can absolutely see where that jump is kind of a dividing line where the show just gets even better. And this episode here is a good, basically a good litmus test for that, because this is definitely one of the better ones of this second season.
You start to see a lot of the things that would become hallmarks. The way they tackle modern pop culture elements in a very sort of authentic way that just rings really true to the time, because this is about cable TV, it's essentially. And so they have a moment where they basically poke fun at the reality of cable TV, the mystique of it.
The whole idea of the illegal cable hookup, was kind of one of those underground things, and you always would hear stories about it. Or I grew up in a cable-free household, so I would just kind of hear from different friends about, oh yeah, we got this hookup, we can get HBO, blah blah blah. And this was kind of the first show that I can think of that kind of shined a light on that, and sort of addressing what was kind of being talked about in schoolyards all over the country, basically.
Right. We need to go back about 30 years, because that's what this is. This is 91, and it's 30 years ago. And there is something that maybe people can't quite grasp, because you just confessed that you grew up in a cable-free household. Yes. And I could say basically the same thing about myself, that to a point, at least for a great majority of my childhood, I was also living in a cable-free home. Certainly had relatives who had cable, and so whenever I'd go on sleepovers or whatever, I'd enjoy that. I'd go for weekends or week-long visits to grandma's house. They would have that stuff. But in my own home, I didn't have cable. Yeah. And for a very long time. Like I didn't have cable in my own home until my early teens. I guess around the time that this episode came out, maybe about a year after, or maybe around the same time. So basically, it's like I got cable at around the same time as the Simpsons get cable. But the concept of it seems very arcane. It seems, I think, to somebody sitting on this side of it, where in this day and age, even the idea of cable television is almost becoming an arcane thing, where most people are like cutting the cord, as they say, right?
Well, yeah, now that's, we've gone full circle where, now the kind of the humble brag is to say that you've cut your cable. and that oh no, I don't even have cable and I've gotten rid of it, and all I do is stream this and stream that. And so it's like now, we're back 30 years ago, somebody might kind of like to say, hey, I got an illegal cable hookup, I got this channel, I got that channel. It's like now it's the complete opposite, where it's you just don't want anything to do with it at all, and everybody's basically just kind of getting rid of all that.
It's basically like now it's all about streaming services. So
Yeah.
now, like, it's all about, oh, you've got that friend who can hook you up with like a password.
Oh yeah,
a
exactly.
user account access for whatever, HBO or Disney or whatever it is. Like, oh, my friend is hooking me up, or if you're living, in a place that like me, like I live overseas, so VPN, it's like that's the thing. Oh, I gotta get a VPN so that I can get the Netflix feed or the Hulu feed or whatever from the US. That's the equivalent now. It's the idea of having cable has now been sort of replaced by the idea of having access to all the different streaming services.
Yeah.
It's weird how
Right.
it's the same thing. It's ultimately the same thing.
Yeah, it basically is, and it's also kind of like, back in the day with the illegal hookups. Like I had a friend who had, this was when I was a little bit older, but I did have a friend who had an illegal hookup, and just like in this episode, it was like, okay, there's a big boxing match. All right, that's where I'm going. That's where I want to go see. So that's exactly what I'm doing. Whereas now, if whenever there's a big event or a big fight, I would never do this, of course, but if you're so inclined, I mean, you can pretty much go online and there's different sites that you can pretty much go to see those fights. And so that's essentially the equivalent of what was going on back when this episode aired.
Well, there is one thing that I would need to sort of go back and try to remember the equivalent of this, because as far as like fights are concerned, big boxing matches, unless my memory is failing me, wasn't that stuff usually the purview of wasn't that usually like pay-per-view?
Right. Well, yeah, like the really big fights, like at least in this episode, when they say the Blockbuster Network, I mean, I kind of see it as like an equivalent to HBO. I mean,
Yes.
that's how I view it. And so
Absolutely.
they've got the big fight, and regular HBO for a very long time, up until just maybe like a year or two ago, they would have boxing. They would have fights on HBO, but they wouldn't, if for the really big ones, if you had a really kind of a name fight, if it was Tyson fighting somebody, or Holyfield, or if we're talking about more recent with the heavyweights like Wilder or Tyson Fury, those are going to be on pay-per-view. So it would be like HBO's pay-per-view. So it'd be all the HBO broadcasters, but you'd have to pay at least back then it was like $55 or $60 in order to watch it. But yeah, I mean, that was going on a ton back in the 90s and even into the 2000s, where when there was a big fight coming up, I had a buddy who had the basically was getting all the pay-per-view channels for free. So all the pay-per-view movies and all the pay-per-view events, and he was getting those all for free.
If you had those cable scramblers, you could you could do you could hack into the pay-per-view channels, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Like without having to pay, you could actually hack into them and just watch whatever content was on them. And nowadays, that's sort of still happening, I guess. Like the whole thing with the fights. I mean, this is going to be 2 or 3 years ago now, because I don't really follow boxing. So yeah, so it was about 2 or 3 years ago. It was the Mayweather McGregor thing, and again, I'm here in La Paz, Bolivia, and much like anywhere in the world, it was sort of like it's not something that anybody had access, like just anybody could access. So with some friends, and they're like, we got to go watch the fight at so and so's house. I was like, so let's all go there, and that was the whole thing. We all went there with the 6-pack of beer and and the munchies, and and we all went there to watch the fight because this guy somehow had access to it. I guess because it was pay-per-view or whatever it was. to watch it on his big 65-inch flat screen TV, and we're all there with our beers having a good time, in theory. Of course, the fight itself was extremely anticlimactic and disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the case with all. I mean, as great as Floyd Mayweather is as a boxer, his fights are boring because he never gets hit, and he really doesn't do much hitting. It's basically just him dancing around, not getting hit. But yeah, that's my own little rant on Floyd Mayweather.
On the count of 3, I want everyone in this arena to scream at the top of your lungs, "Fuck the Mayweathers!" And while we're at it, fuck Showtime too!
But yeah, I mean, it is very similar to how it's portrayed in this 30-year-old Simpson episode. It's, everybody getting together, they find out who's got the access to it, and that's the house you got to go to.
And that's the thing, in this particular Simpsons episode, we're not even talking about a pay-per-view thing. We're talking about
no, that's right.
It's like what you're saying. It's like HBO.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of HBO back then.
That's how I took it with the whole Blockbuster network. Was okay. This is their riff on HBO, and apparently nobody else in the entire city of Springfield seems to have cable at all. Well, obviously Mr. Burns can afford to, but he likes to watch the boxing with the common man. So that's why he shows up. But yeah, everybody else, I guess, just does not afford cable, and that's why Homer for one night, his house is the place to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really funny how when Homer and his coworkers are showering together, which I do find kind of odd. It's like they're not like, what are they at the gym? Like I don't get that.
With the sign to make sure to wash everything.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the whole thing because they work in a nuclear power plant, so it said, they need to decontaminate or whatever.
Yeah.
But my point is, so they're showering as they, discuss the upcoming fight, and it's really funny how his two coworkers it's Lenny and Carl are, talking about what they're planning on doing. I was like, oh, we can what is it, like, listen to the fight? Yeah, listen to highlights.
Well, that's the thing. It's kind of, and that's so funny because that, when I was much younger growing up and there would be these big fights, what they were talking about is pretty much what I would do, is because at that point I didn't know anybody who was watching these fights or how to watch them. So yeah, you would listen to the radio, and like the news station that would have like these round by round updates. They would come on, every few minutes, and they would kind of just give you a little round by round update as to what happened in the 5th round. Did somebody go down? How did anybody get any kind of a point deducted? And and then they would go on and go with the rest of the news. And so yeah, you would listen to that, and then at the end, when it was over, you could put on the sports report on the local news station, and they, just like they say, they would have just kind of still photos from the fight. And you would just see, like, a little still photo of, George Foreman throwing a punch at Holyfield, and or Tyson, putting his mouth on Holyfield's ear. And that's pretty much all that, because that's all that they would allow the news stations to show at that point. But yeah, I mean, that whole exchange in the shower is right on the money.
And as you said, Monty Burns eavesdrops, which is also quite creepy. He's eavesdropping on his workers showering. But in any case, so he decides he's also going to crash this party that Homer wants to run. And the thing is, I like the way the show sort of, because the show needs to contrive it. I mean, the idea is that the whole damn town just conglomerates at Homer's living room to watch the fight. That's the concept. Right? You could kind of buy that. This is a small town, okay, fine, to some degree. The idea that this millionaire is going to be part of that, I mean, it's just because he happens to be a major character, and it would just be funny to include him.
Yeah.
But yeah. And so they give him a reason. It's like, because they acknowledge it. He goes like, couldn't you pay for it yourself? Like you have enough money to buy, to have cable. It's like, clearly, because like, oh, I reserve it for the smells of other men, or whatever it is that he says.
Yes.
But I think to myself, wait a minute, okay, that it's one thing to watch it on cable TV, but Mr. Burns could clearly afford to actually be at the fight, like
that's true.
like at the actual place, Madison Square Garden or wherever the hell it is. He could be there, surrounded by people. Like everything that he's saying that he wants to see, like at Homer's living room, he could experience it even much more, like at the actual ring.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every time that we see Mr. Burns, he has nothing but contempt for the common man and wants nothing to do with anything that they would want to do. So yeah, it is pretty funny that all of a sudden with this big fight, I've got to go to a regular Joe's house. And
yeah, it definitely works. And we can appreciate its skewering of now we talk a little bit about it, the way it skewers cable TV, the format of cable TV in general. You picked up on how the Blockbuster channel is obviously a riff on HBO, and it makes sense because that's where all the big movies are playing, and that was pretty much true. I mean, based on what we're seeing, the Simpsons family enjoys. I think they watch Die Hard and they watch Wall Street.
Yeah, they watch Die Hard, Wall Street, and Jaws.
Right, and we can assume that they aired on the Blockbuster channel, much like those movies probably aired on HBO when they were on cable. And so that's pretty funny. The whole thing, what is it, like Hear Me Roar, the network for women?
That's right, yes.
That's very funny.
That's basically how he sells Marge on keeping the cable, is once she hears that she can learn how to make her own bandages, that she's all in at that point.
Yeah, and I guess that's a riff on Lifetime?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I mean, that's Lifetime. Right now, Lifetime is pretty much just the movies, I think. And then they probably have, like, old shows that are in reruns. But, yeah, I think maybe back in the day, it did have more programming, more talk shows and things like that. That I think they were kind of lampooning with that show about the bandages.
The thing about Lifetime, it's like programming for women. The funny thing about Lifetime and Lifetime movies is that they all seem to be about like stalkers, evil doctors, and about 75% of them seem to star Eric Roberts, which.
Yeah, I think he had a pretty good run. I mean, I remember back, I think in the 90s, the Lifetime movie that sort of got a lot of attention just because of the title was Mother May I Sleep with Danger.
That's right. Yes. I remember that title very well, and I don't remember the plot.
I don't remember the plot either. I just remember that title, and it just seemed like that was something that kind of got into the mainstream of pop culture. People were kind of cracking on that title quite a bit, and it got a little bit of at least more notice than a Lifetime movie would usually get.
That these films tend to have titles like that. I mean, I do remember that one. Now that you brought it up, I definitely remember that one. Or what's another one? I don't think this was a Lifetime movie, but it was definitely a TV movie. I Know My First Name is Steven.
Yes, that's right. It was like a kidnapping movie, right? Yes, I do remember that. Well, I remember the one that was like a big deal because it was all about that same sort of topic about the missing children. It was like more in the early 80s was Adam.
Of course.
Yeah, which was based on the guy who ended up hosting America's Most Wanted on the unfortunate incident with his son. And I just remember that was like a big deal. And people were like, "Oh God, did you see Adam?" And I was like, "No, I wasn't allowed to watch that." But maybe that might have been kind of the granddaddy of the missing child TV movie.
And I used to confuse that movie. Or at least I guess I got confused because around the same time as that came out, because there was a lot of this. I mean, I guess it was the whole stranger danger thing, and so like in the 80s, in the early to mid 80s, and back, throughout most of the 80s, there was a lot of this going on, a lot of movies that touch on this topic. There's this movie called Without a Trace, I believe, which is also about a child kidnapping. In that one, the detective is Judd Hirsch. So he does some pretty intense dramatic acting. I don't know if I think it's Christine Lottie or someone like that who plays the mother who's got the missing kid. And
You will wake up to every parent's nightmare in Without a Trace. It begins as just another ordinary day in the life of little Alex Selby, until he waved goodbye to his mother. Then the nightmare began, and only his mother believed it could end.
I don't care if I have to talk to every lunatic in the city. Somebody has seen my boy.
Has your son ever run away before?
For what?
Look, I know how you feel.
Don't tell me how I feel. You felt what I feel, you'd be screaming.
But it was that these things were, I watched them as a kid, and so for a kid, they're kind of scary. Does that make sense to you? It's like, it's scary. It's like, it can be frightening.
Well, what would happen is, because you had, at that point, you had the three major networks, and then, Fox came along a little bit later. And so if any network had success with anything, the other two networks would try to replicate it. And so if there was a big made-for-TV movie on one network, well, then the other ones were going to do their versions. And it was, that's how we ended up with 3 different Amy Fisher, Joey Buttafuoco movies.
That's right. What I appreciate about those movies is that they were 3, but at least it was like giving you the story. Like the 3 of them were worth watching if you wanted to get sort of the full spectrum, because each one gave you the story from a different angle.
Yes.
You had the one that was from Amy, from Amy Fisher's point of view exclusively, which really paints Joey Buttafuoco as essentially a rapist and is just a complete sleazeball, and paints her completely as a victim, and that whole thing. That was one of them. Then there was the other one that's from Joey Buttafuoco's side, and that's the one that starred Alyssa Milano.
I want to say, was it Anthony Dennison in that one who was the Buttafuoco?
Anthony Dennison plays Buttafuoco in the one in the Drew Barrymore.
In the Drew Barrymore. Okay.
Yeah,
I like him.
Yeah, the more like cinematic of the 3 of them. That one called the Amy Fisher story. But that one sort of presents a more balanced view. It's not like he's not the devil incarnate and she's not a complete innocent.
The important thing is that if you're willing to invest 5 hours, you will get a lot of perspectives of the whole Amy Fisher, Joey Buttafuoco situation.
That is correct. Yes, and and Joey Buttafuoco is in the 3 movies is a very handsome man that in real life he is not.
Was Ed Marinero? Was he one of the Buttafuocos?
Ed Marinero was Buttafuoco in the one from her point of view, where where he's completely the villain of the story, and then Jack Scalia.
Oh yes, the Point Man.
He played Joey Buttafuoco in the one where Joey Buttafuoco is essentially the anti-hero. He's essentially a sympathetic character who flirted with the wrong girl, and
All this damage by someone who still shows absolutely no remorse for her actions.
Sometimes I think this is a nightmare and it didn't happen, and then I realize that it did.
The bullet is still lodged in the base of my brain and causes me constant pain and suffering.
Amy Fisher is a liar and has 0 credibility.
So yeah, cable TV. I mean, it's they poke fun at that. They poke fun at. I love the bit where he's flipping through channels and he lands on I guess a stand-up comedy routine, because again, this is one of the big things that really, you could really only see on cable TV. It was just they would show up before Comedy Central existed. They would show up regularly on HBO. They had the HBO stand-up or whatever. What was it called? 1 hour.
Well, there was the HBO, I guess it was the half-hour comedy special, and that was, everybody kind of had one of those, all the comics at the time. The comic, at least that they show in The Simpsons, it seems like kind of a veiled version of Jerry Seinfeld. At least that's how it came to me. It kind of has a little bit of that rhythm to him.
Don't you hate it when you go to the bathroom and there's no toilet paper?
Homer with it's funny because it's true.
It covers a wide range of what it is, and that's essentially, I think, the meat of the episode. And what makes it so memorable is how well it sort of goes into this, how authentic it all feels, And right down to that, something that we've just reflected on from our own reality, the idea that neither of us grew up in, in homes that had cable for a lot of the time. So we could completely identify with the idea, because you go like, okay, so let's look at it like dollars to donuts, because The Simpsons is a middle class family, but they can't afford cable. Cable is apparently a huge expense, and I think people maybe don't realize that. And I think it was. I mean, the thing about cable is because it's not just, they have different packages. So obviously you could get the basic package, which was probably the most inexpensive one, which wouldn't have any of the big movie channels.
That's true. Yeah, if you wanted to just enjoy E and ESPN and A&E and Lifetime, then yeah, you could just get basic cable. And the joke that we always had was that whenever there was an ad on TV to order cable, that it was only playing in our house. There was no other home that was getting that ad. It was just because it seemed like at this point that everybody else had it. It's almost like everybody we knew, and like you tell people, "Oh no, I don't have MTV or VH1," and they look at you like you're from Mars.
Right. No, I sympathize. I mean, it's the sort of thing where I guess I didn't have cable until I was like in middle school, until I was in 7th or 8th grade or something. That's when finally, and even then it was just one package. It was a basic package. And I think we had one of the movie channels, like HBO. I think that was the only one. We didn't sign up for any of the other ones because there's so many of them. There were.
I was in my 20s when I finally had cable, and I was on my own.
So it's very realistic, the whole thing. The character played by Phil Hartman, the illegal cable guy, who comes in with the illegal cable box. And is actually a shady character. There's that part of the episode, which is, the meat of it. Obviously the boxer Roderick Tatum, clearly modeled on Mike Tyson. It's obviously a parody of Mike Tyson. Right. And I do love the press conference, where like the other guy is like, I'm going to dedicate this fight to my manager, and then Tatum also is like, I would also like to dedicate this fight to his dead manager.
Dedicate the fight to your own manager.
That's very funny. That's really funny. So like that part of it is obviously great, but then the other part of it, I also think is a very interestingly told morality play about. It's one of those things where you can point out, The Simpsons was at the time criticized for being edgy, too edgy or whatever. But look at how they tackle this issue, where clearly it's a very moral. It's got a kind of moral code.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because it has it both ways. I mean, it portrays stealing cable as essentially a victimless crime in some way, because like the whole thing with the pamphlet, and so on some level you can look at it as a victimless crime, but it still firmly lands on the fact that it is a crime. I mean, ultimately what you're doing is wrong. You are doing something that's not right. You're getting service that you should be paying for. You're not paying for it. This is not right. So it lands on a firmly moral ground as far as that's concerned, where it takes the religious angle. Lisa's afraid of going to hell. That's why she decides to protest that her dad has hooked up the illegal cable.
It's definitely, like you said, it's the moral code of the episode. And I mean, to me, the funniest moment where that really comes into play isn't even really a scene with Homer. It's when Lisa is out shopping at the grocery store with Marge, and Marge grabs a couple grapes and enjoys those, and Lisa does not approve. And when they go to the checkout line, that checker, that's one of my favorite one and done characters on The Simpsons.
At the time, I didn't pay much attention, but I had known that people were doing voices for The Simpsons. And I guess I remember when I saw that episode, I think I assumed that it was Andrew Dice Clay doing a cameo, just because he had that cadence, I mean, I believe it's Hank Azaria.
Anything else?
Yes, I ate 2 grapes. Please charge me for them.
Oh, 2 grapes? Who cares?
Just charge me something, please.
Yeah, okay, all right. I need a price check on 2 grapes. Yeah, you heard me, Phil. 2 measly stinking grapes.
That is my favorite part of the episode as well. That's my favorite sequence. The whole thing from how it starts, from where like Lisa admonishes her, right to like, the whole thing is just brilliantly funny and truthful. Because come on, I mean, we've all done that. Like I certainly have. Popped a couple of grapes like at the supermarket. I've done it. I mean, back when they used to be right there, like it's like you just grab a couple and munch on them. I used to do it. My dad used to do it. Like it's just something you do at the supermarket. But it's a very funny scene, and it's sort of Marge ultimately humors her daughter and embarrasses herself at the checkout line. But then ultimately, Homer has a real deep crisis of conscience. It's getting to him. I like the way they portray that, where Homer is apparently, he's stealing cable, but as we see, he's also guilty of a lot of stealing, a lot of quote unquote harmless stealing, whether it's mugs from Moe's or just stuff from his office.
Right.
It sort of speaks to the whole, but dude, admit it, you've done this. It's confronting the audience with, oh yeah, you're looking at this, look how harmless it is. And look at this. I mean, admit it. Like if you're somebody who works in an office, chances are, sure, you've lifted stuff, from the office. Or if you frequent an establishment like a bar or a restaurant or whatever it is, you go there frequently and there's stuff you'd like to have and you have a moment that you can swipe it, you go ahead and do it. I mean, it's like when people steal towels from hotels it's the same thing. It's the same principle.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's done it, and that's just such clever writing that the writers know that it's a lot more than just cable, that not only Homer has dabbled in stealing, but that everybody has dabbled in stealing. And so to kind of point that out with both the mugs from Moe's and the office supplies from his job is it's really, really smart stuff. It's
sort of this building thing where what you're seeing is how Lisa is completely like the image, because Marge confronts him about it. Marge is like she's losing respect for you,
Right.
And then in that sort of comes back to bite him, because then it's like Lisa's just standing there looking at him as all this stuff is happening. It's like so first it's Moe's mugs, and then it's the boss is coming and he's got to hide all that stuff, and then the police, like they come in. And he thinks it's because of the cable, and they're just like, we just want to watch the fight.
The word is out. Again, the only person in Springfield with access to the Blockbuster channel.
Very tellingly, Flanders is not among the. I don't remember. I'd have to look at the crowd scene, but I don't think Flanders shows up.
He's not there. I guess he'd had it in the once the cable guy tried to offer him free cable. That was it for Flanders. He was not, and I guess that's also the one person that Homer just would not probably want at his house for a big fight. That might have been another reason that we didn't see him.
Hey, Flanders, who put that bug up your butt?
Oh, I wanted to subscribe to that new arts and crafts channel. Well, sir, they send over this flim-flam man to install it. You know what he did? He offered to hook me up illegally to every cable channel for only $50.
Boy, what's this world coming to?
That's exactly what I...
Gotta go!
There is the strong presence of Phil Hartman.
Yes.
But here's the interesting thing about Phil Hartman. I mean, Phil Hartman is somebody who showed up, who's obviously a legendary comic presence, but very legendary on The Simpsons for creating all these very interesting side characters like Lionel Hutz or Troy McClure, as in this episode. Troy McClure is one of the infomercials. Troy McClure is the host. But if you look at it, usually when you have like a guest voice, it's something where it's centered around the guest voice. Like you have like, whether it's Kelsey Grammer as Sideshow Bob, or Danny DeVito as Homer's brother, or whatever it is. It's usually like the guest star is kind of a centerpiece of the episode. It's an important, or Dustin Hoffman as a substitute teacher, and so on, right? Yes. Obviously, Phil Hartman's not at the level of DeVito or Hoffman, or certainly he wasn't then. But
no, not then. No,
he was enough of an outlier that they bill him as a special guest voice. But he's not doing anything specific. He's kind of just playing these side characters. It's the cable guy, who was a minor character who's only got like 2 scenes. It's right. Troy McClure's got one, and I'm pretty sure that he does his Charlton Heston impression I'm pretty sure that he plays Moses at the beginning of the episode.
The Lord has handed down to us 10 commandments by which to live. I will now read them in no particular order.
And that's it. But you go like, and I think that's unique. I think that's unique because that's not something they normally did. But with Phil Hartman, they did that. They just had him like just pop in and do little things every now and then.
Yeah, because I mean, like at this point, Hartman had, he had been on Saturday Night Live for a few years. He hadn't really blown up yet. Like I always, just from when I was watching Saturday Night Live during that era, I always liked him, but I always felt like he didn't really start to get a lot of acclaim until he started playing Clinton. And I think that was kind of the thing that sort of put him over the top, where, he had way more exposure at that point, and you just kind of started to see him in all kinds of things more, was once he started playing Clinton. This episode would have been, just a little bit before that era. How exactly he got into doing so many different voices on there, I'm not too sure, but somebody must have really liked him, and somebody must have liked what he could do with their dialogue, because the characters that he played, and just any little extra push that he could give to some of their lines, it was just perfect.
He had that singular kind of cadence. He had that great sort of voice. It has this really classic quality. So he could play somebody like Lionel Hutz, that kind of a lawyer character. He just had this knack for. There was something he could do in his cadence. He played characters like that there was a kind of shadiness to them,
right?
Combined with like a likability at the same time. It's a weird combo that he just could pull off very uniquely and in his own way. Because then eventually, when he was on news radio, Bill McNeil is essentially a Simpsons character.
Oh yeah. 100%. And and I always kind of see Lionel Hutz as almost sort of the animated version of Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. I mean, they're kind of they kind of both have that. I mean, Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer is much more successful, but they both kind of have that smarmy sort of way about them, and the shyster kind of quality to them.
It's interesting. We look at Phil Hartman now, and he's this sort of presence that, as you said, it's not until he played Clinton that he really exploded. But here's the interesting thing also, because he had already played Reagan.
That's true. That's right.
Because he started in like the late 80s. I don't know when he started on Saturday Night Live, but I guess.
I think 86, I want to say, was when he started. And he kind of, came in with, Carvey and Kevin Nealon and those guys.
He did Reagan, and he's got that classic, it's a classic SNL sketch where you've got like, where Reagan is sort of this doddering, kindly, grandfatherly type of dude talking to the little girl. And then, absent-minded or whatever. And as soon as the little girl leaves, he rolls up his sleeves and is like, all right, let's get to work. And it turns out that that's just he just portrays that for the cameras, but he's actually a ruthless, sharp dude behind the scenes.
That's a great sketch.
And that's a classic one. But again, you're right. I think it wasn't until he was Clinton, for whatever reason, that's when he really exploded as. He went from being a utility player essentially to being like one of the stars of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, because I think what happened was during the early part of his run, it was Carvey who kind of busted out and had all these characters, and there was Church Lady, Hans and Franz, and then later on with Wayne and Garth, and it was Carvey was kind of the one who was dominating everything, even onward with George Bush. And so even though Hartman was doing great work and he was extremely funny on the show, like I said, I don't think he was really getting the kind of hype that he deserved until he started doing Clinton.
It's interesting because, he was already doing Clinton during the elections before he was actually sworn in as president. And I remember that there being an article, I don't know if it was in TV Guide or it was in one of the Sunday magazines, probably from one of the papers or whatever it is. And it focused on that. It was like a spotlight on Phil Hartman. It was a spotlight on how now, it was a big deal because he's the president. He's playing Clinton, and that's going to be, at least for the next 4 years, that's going to be a major thing for the show. But they said, like, how is he going to do it? I mean, Clinton, he's not Reagan. You know what I mean? And he's not Bush. He at the time, it was not perceived that Clinton could be exploited for comedy.
Right.
Because he
right.
didn't have that exploitable sort of cartoony element that Reagan and Bush had. And everybody's going like, what's going to happen? And who knew? You know, it's like, but of course,
yeah.
I mean,
plenty of material for comedy, no doubt about it.
But it also shows that it's not always. Sometimes it's not always. It is up to the comedian. It is up to the impersonator. It's obviously the genius that Phil Hartman brought that to it. Brought his talent to Clinton, making him a character on Saturday Night Live. And there is a very, you could posit this theory forward that Phil Hartman's version of Bill Clinton made Bill Clinton more likable to general audiences, just in general. And that might be why he was such a popular president. One of the reasons why he was such a popular president, I think, has a lot to do with Hartman.
I can totally see that. Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a really good point. Yeah, it was definitely the kind of, because the way politics was handled on Saturday Night Live, it was a lot different back then. It was like, yeah, they were lampooning, but it wasn't like, we hate this guy. This is the president. We're going to goof on him. It wasn't really going for the throat or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, they were doing it on a certain level, with a certain level of respect, I suppose. Where it's sort of like tasteful teasing. The tasteful part is debatable, but still good-natured teasing. It's sort of like, like you just said, we're not trying to commit character assassination here. We're just having a goof. We're having a laugh, and we're in fact inviting you to join in and laugh at yourself as well if you want.
Right.
Which is sort of what they continue to do. It was even with George W. Bush. It's just that, I mean, and I don't want to go too deep into this. Because,
I hear you.
It's an unpleasant thing to talk about, but we can talk about it for a couple of minutes. But it's just that the current thing, it's just kind of hard. It's kind of hard to just laugh at it because it's just so ugly. And they have to comment on it because they can't not comment on it. So I think it's sort of like, but if we're nice, it's like we're not being honest because this is really fucking horrible. That's sort of what I think happened. It's like this imbalance, it's just so hard to laugh at it, to just be like, oh yeah, isn't that funny? Life goes on. It's just,
No,
so
it's definitely, it's not that way now.
And yeah, you can definitely tell, like Hartman or Dana Carvey or all the other impersonators, they didn't have any kind of animosity towards their characters. They essentially were like, we'll have fun with it, even if it was somebody that maybe they didn't even vote for, because like George W. Bush, they were ultimately like, he's the president, whatever. We'll just have a laugh.
Carvey was like pretty much almost buddy with the first Bush. I mean, I remember seeing him at the White House, and like, I don't know Dana Carvey's politics, but I would imagine he's probably not a huge conservative, but I do remember that, seeing him interviewed a lot about playing Bush and just saying, oh yeah, he's a good guy. I've hung out with him. And it was just a very different era.
Yeah, everything was so different. Whereas now, like, I think it's pretty clear that Alec Baldwin despises.
Yeah.
And I go, like, even as thinking of from the point of view of as an actor, they always tell you one of the things about being an actor is that you have to like the character. Like, even like whoever you're playing in a movie, whether you're playing the hero or the villain of the story, you have to find like a part of empathy. You have to like the character you're playing.
You need to latch on to something.
Yeah, you need to sort of find the humanity in the character and be like, all right, he's the villain of this story, but I've got to like him because I have to bring him to life. I have to like find what I like about this guy. This Ricardo Montalban in an interview talking about, Wrath of Khan, where he talks about, Khan, and he goes like, his approach to the character was to play him in a certain way because nobody thinks of themselves as evil, and so obviously when he plays Khan, he didn't play him as an evil man. He played him as a wronged man who was looking for revenge or looking for justice or whatever. So from his point of view, he's the hero. He's the hero of his story, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, I guess it's difficult with historical characters. Like if they hire an actor to play Adolf Hitler, which has happened many times. I mean, yeah, of course these things can be hard, obviously. For you to find the humanity or find the connection where you go like, all right, let me, because it's like you got to be that guy,
when you're talking about this, it reminds me, and this is weird considering who this is coming from, but it reminds me of an interview that I saw with James Woods, who obviously now is not exactly the most liked actor of all time, but I remember that he did that, and it's also weird because this is a movie that he did with Alec Baldwin. It was the Ghosts of Mississippi, where James Woods, played a racist murderer essentially.
Yes.
And I remember seeing an interview with him, and he said that he had the opportunity to meet him if he wanted to meet him, to get a better sense of his character. And, I remember in this interview, James Woods was like, nope, I don't want anything to do with that guy. I don't need to be anywhere near him. I will play the part, but there's absolutely zero need for me to meet this guy. And so that just kind of rung into my head when you were talking about this. And it's kind of a double irony because James Woods is kind of now one of the most hated actors of our time, and this was in a movie with Alec Baldwin, who plays Trump.
And I remember that. I mean, I remember that movie. I think it's a decent movie. And
he got an Oscar nomination out of it.
Yeah, no, and he's great in the movie. He's it's a fantastic, chilling performance of pure evil. And the thing is that, and here's the thing about James Woods. I think he's dug his own grave. That's the way I see it. I mean, I go because you say he's one of the most separating his ridiculous tweets from reality, from just from his performances, I still think he's a great actor. I still,
me too.
I'll still be I'll still watch one of his films, and I still enjoy watching him. And I'm just anytime one of his tweets come up, or I'm just like, dude, just shut up. I mean, nobody asked you. Just shut up. That's really you're only making yourself look worse. I mean, it's not like every conservative actor does this. There's plenty of conservative actors that I like who I know I don't agree with their political views. I could list them right now. We talked about Kelsey Grammer, Gary Sinise. I don't know. It's a huge list. But the difference is they're not out there just blasting their rhetoric all over the place and just making themselves look like assholes. So now back to Woods. It is interesting, though, that considering the characters he's played in that movie, of course, he plays a despicable human being. That there are other, and there's another movie I think where he played Roy Cohn.
That's right.
HBO,
yeah.
Yes, who many people will say got what he deserved in some ways. And I believe Al Pacino also played Roy Cohn.
Woods also played Rudy Giuliani.
That is correct. He played Rudy Giuliani, and I believe Woods played Rudy Giuliani, and then basically became Rudy Giuliani. Because the thing is that I saw that TV movie because when that came out, there was that very brief moment in which, as a New Yorker, I kind of had this grudging respect for Giuliani, even though my political views did not align with his at all. But because of his response to 9/11, like many, I was just like, I love the way he behaved, whatever it is. So for that moment, there was this moment of
that was everybody. I mean, that was he was America's mayor, and it was
right.
Yeah, I mean, everybody loved him in those years after that.
Right, and I always thought, Robert Duvall should have played Giuliani, whatever, at the time, in terms of resemblance. But then, so I watched the movie, and in that movie, James Woods portrays Giuliani in a pretty flattering light. And there's this whole moment where he talks about how one of his heroes is Kennedy, right? And he quotes him or something, and then somebody is like, but Kennedy was a Democrat, and he's like, as I once was. He's talking about how he switched from the Democratic to the Republican side, right? And talks about why, and into this very self-righteous sort of melodramatic speech. And I go and that's what happened to Woods. It's after 9/11, a bunch of actors who were not conservatives just had this fit of madness, James Woods, Ron Silver, a whole bunch of them just sort of snapped.
Really put my heart and soul into Rudy Giuliani. He's a man I admire greatly.
So I look at some of his early work, like True Believer or Salvador, these movies where he plays very staunchly liberal characters.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder what he thinks of that now, what he looking back. And these are performances that were acclaimed and films that were highly acclaimed, and so I wonder what he thinks of that. And then I go, and one of the last movies he made, I think basically the last big movie that he made was White House Down.
That's right. Yes.
It's weird to me because, like, in White House Down, it's very much, Jamie Foxx is essentially Obama. James Woods is his chief of staff, but he resents the president, for being soft on certain things, right, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I went, like, shortly after this, I became more aware, we all did, of James Woods' actual political views. And so it was very strange to be like, so in that movie, he's basically playing himself, because, like, all his rants about Obama on Twitter are essentially, they almost seem like they're dialogue lifted from this film. But he gets a great death. So that ultimately, like, anytime you get pissed off at Woods for his political views, just watch White House Down. Watch the last 20 minutes of White House Down. That should satisfy any rage you'll feel, and then you could just be like, all right, and then you can go back and watch one of James Woods' great movies, from before he was banished from Hollywood.
Yeah, or you can watch The End of The Specialist.
Yes, that's also great. That's a particularly terrific. He goes in a real blaze of glory in that movie as well. Yes.
Oh yeah. No, he's. I mean, like I said. I mean, a lot of what he has to say, not so cool, but I really do think he was one of the better actors of his era. I thought he was, just movie after movie, just putting in great performances.
No, he's never boring. Like, anytime you watch a movie with James Woods, he will not disappoint. He'll be interesting to watch, and he'll make the movie better.
There were no nuclear weapons in Iran.
But there will be. The Middle East is our last war. It will be us or them. I choose that Kevin Charles Walker will be the last American soldier to die in that conflict in vain.
Yeah, so is there anything else we haven't discussed?
I think there is the subplot of Bart watching the racy movies, and then his idea to not only watch these movies, but to get all the local kids to pay to watch them, and it's in essence kind of become his own little porn mogul basically. And I thought it was nice, because what I like about that scene when he has the exhibition with all of his buddies there watching, is that you've got pretty much all the kids from the school. You've got the bullies, you've got the dorks, they're all together. They've all kind of come together for this common purpose, and nobody is chastising anybody else. They're all just there for the same goal, and I thought that was kind of a nice moment.
Yeah, well, porn brings everybody together.
It's, totally.
Good times.
Who's got time to bully when there's porn on?
Yes, it's the true unifier.
You're watching Top Hat Entertainment, adult programming all day, every day, except in Florida and Utah. Coming up next, Stardust Memories.
Baby. Ay, caramba! Bart! Dad!
Son, you shouldn't watch that other channel. It's only for mommies and daddies who love each other very much.
So yeah, great episode. It's definitely a classic. Lots of good stuff here. Gave us a lot to talk about. This was a great talk.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the better ones of this season, and I think it holds up tremendously well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank you for joining me. As always, it's great, taking a little trip down memory lane and just having a good time.
Yes.
And I'm looking forward to our next chat, which will be in a few weeks.
Oh, absolutely. Can't wait.
All right, man. You take care.
All right, you do the same. Thank you.
So that's it for this week's installment of The Simpsons Countdown. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, please give us a like. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. This podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Anchor FM, or pretty much anywhere. A brief review might actually help boost the podcast's profile, and if it isn't too much trouble, please do share this with all your friends, both virtual and actual, on social media. I'm Erix Antoine. I'll be back next Thursday evening to talk about Principal Charming, in which Principal Skinner gets into an improbably romantic relationship with Marge's sister Patty. My very good friend Mike Flynn will be here to discuss that with me, and I hope you'll join us. Until then, stay safe out there, continue observing your biosafety and social distancing protocols, because whether your area is opening up or not, We're not quite through this thing. We need everyone to do their part, keeping themselves and everyone else healthy. And we'll get through this in due time. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
The experience of making Rudy was something that I will never forget, because my political point of view might be a little bit different from Jody's and Stephen's.